Tim Barger, the senior minister here. I welcome you to this place where we Toledo Unitarians gather. If you do not know our church, all people are welcome here. We are Unitarian Universalists with minds that think, hearts that love, and hands that are ready to serve. Together we care for our earth and we work for friendship and peace in our world. And those are words that we say every Sunday this year. So if you'd like what you see and hear this afternoon, perhaps you'll come back. And now I'll introduce Joe Moran, who organized this event along with members of Unitarian Action. Joe.
Thank you, Reverend Barger. I am Joe Moran. I want to welcome you to this presentation today. I'm a member of this congregation and a member of the Unitarian Action Committee, which is sponsoring it. And I'm also the moderator today. There are many individuals due thanks for helping to put this together. So many that I don't want to give individual names because I'm afraid I'm going to miss someone. So I'll just say in advance, thank you. But I do want to recognize a couple people, a few people here that really have helped me quite a bit. And I want to thank Jeff Slauson for his technical support and helping me figure out how to do a PowerPoint and how to get it over on the thumb drive. I want to thank the audiovisual crew, headed by Walter McGee, who did an amazing job on some of the slides maybe you saw on your way in here. I want to thank you, Marilyn Groth, for putting up with my numerous emails and questions. Thank you all. A couple of housekeeping issues. The restrooms are just down the hallway outside the sanctuary to your right. And please be sure to turn off all your cell phones, electronic devices. Alex will be speaking for about 30 minutes, followed by a Q&A, and we anticipate ending around 2 to 2:15. And we ask that your questions be held till the end of his talk by just simply raising your hand, and a card will be brought to you by Krista back there, back to the right, my right, and she'll bring it to you, and there's a pen in your hem rack, and you can fill out your question. She'll bring it forward to me, and I can read it to Alex. My wife, Joyce, and I, Joyce? There, somewhere. There she is, right there. We had the pleasure of meeting the Groths about 1 year ago. They've been here for, I guess, maybe a couple of years in Toledo area, through a mutual friend in Davis, California. And we've had the opportunity to dine with them several times. And Alex, when I found out that you, like myself, are a lifelong Yankee fan, well, I knew you were a special person. Well, Alex, you've had a very remarkable life. And it was not one that was assured. It happened, and it was possible because with the aid of your mother, you lived in one of the darkest periods in human history. It claimed roughly 6 million Jews, hundreds of thousands from your own city of Warsaw, and of course, thousands and thousands of others. So we're privileged today to hear from a person that lived through a time that we can only read about and try to imagine. And it's an opportunity that's fast disappearing with the passage of years. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming Professor Alex Groth. And I left something important out, so let me do this first. I forgot to read his bio. So let me read this biography. Alex Groth was 7 years old when World War II broke out in Europe, and today is a 92-year-old Holocaust survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto and the Holocaust in Poland. He came to the United States as a teenager, attended high school in New York City, and the City College of New York, where he graduated with high honors in 1954. He obtained his PhD in political science from the Columbia University in 1960 and is professor emeritus of political science at the University of California, Davis, where he taught comparative politics from 1962 to 1998. That would be 36 years. Professor Groth is author and editor of 14 books, over 100 scholarly articles, and I would add that several of Alex's books can be found on Amazon. One is about President Lincoln. His 1999 book, Democracies Against Hitler, was reissued by Routledge Press in New York in 2018, in a list described by the publishers as restoring to print books of some of the most influential scholars, academic scholars in the last 120 years. In 2015, Groth was the co-convener of an international conference on Allied powers, response to the Holocaust, held in Jerusalem under the auspices of the World Jewish Congress, and portions of that are available on YouTube. So now, join me in welcoming Alex Groth.
Very nice, Joe. Thank you so much. I want to start, first of all, by thanking the members of the congregation and the leadership of the congregation, Pastor Barger particularly, for inviting me here. And I want to thank you, the audience, for your interest. And of course, I want to thank Joe Moran for a lot of great help and incidentally locating some extremely interesting slides, pictures from the Warsaw Ghetto, which was really one of my central experiences of the Holocaust. So I also wanted to mention to you that today and tomorrow is a day which is designated as Yom HaShoah, or Holocaust Remembrance Day, throughout Jewish communities of the world, and Israel in particular, and it's quite a coincidence. Now, I wanted to mention to you some of my connections to the subject, so to speak. As Joe said, I was 7 when the Nazis marched into Warsaw. And on October 5th, 1939, I witnessed a parade reviewed by Adolf Hitler on another street in Warsaw, because I saw the parade from a building on what is one of the main streets of Warsaw, Marszałkowska Street. I will ask, by the way, is there anyone here who's visited Warsaw? No one visited Warsaw. Okay, well, I will mention some things. I wanted to mention some things to you.
Do you want me to get that?
And I have my little goodie bag here. Should you ever visit Warsaw, there is a museum in Warsaw dedicated to the history and the memory of Polish Jews. And in it, there is an exhibit which you may see perhaps 15 years from now, or 5 or 10, long after I'm gone, which may remind you of me. And this is because where I lived in the Warsaw Ghetto, I lived on a street called Sienna, spelled S-I-E-N-N-A, Sienna Street, in Warsaw, in what was the home of Mary Berg. And Mary Berg, a neighbor of mine, I was 8 years old at the time, she was 16. I did not personally know her, but she wrote the first book by a Holocaust survivor published in the Western world, and particularly in the United States, because she was a dual citizen, American and Polish, and the Nazis traded her for some bigwigs that they were exchanging. She came to New York in 1944 and published this book in 1945. And anyway, so the museum has a special acknowledgement of that. And she lived in my building or I in hers, whichever way you want to look at it. The book, by the way, is very interesting and offers a whole approach to the Holocaust, which itself is naturally, as you might imagine, a subject of considerable controversy, offers a certain point of view which I believe is very important to appreciate, but which was lost by various scholars. Now, one of those scholars you may have come across who lost sight of it was none other than Raoul Hilberg, who wrote The Destruction of the European Jews in 1961 and preceded me closely at Columbia University in the 1950s. Anyway, so let me just indicate some of these links so you can appreciate my vantage point on the Holocaust experience. When I saw the Nazi parade at age 7, I was looking furtively out of the window in this building because the Nazis said that they would fire on any Poles who came to the window or leaned out of windows or did anything of the sort. So I sort of looked furtively, and I was enormously impressed by the Nazi parade. At age 7, I thought that the Nazis were unbeatable. That's how good they looked. And I always used to tell my students in later years that I had never been interested in politics until age 7. And that was, of course, when I saw that parade. And it was fortunate that I turned out to be wrong about the question of Nazi invincibility. And of course, a lot of Americans made great contributions to the fact that that's how it happened. Now, from age 8 to age 10, I was an inmate of the Warsaw Ghetto, and I did want to say some things about that because it is a very important part of the Holocaust which is sometimes both overlooked and minimized or misrepresented. And from 1942 to 1945, I was in hiding and on the run in various places, and I was liberated, and this is somewhat paradoxical, and I recognized it as a paradox, liberated by the forces of Joseph Stalin. I was actually liberated by Marshal Ivan Konyev's army, Southern Ukrainian Front, in January of 1945, when I was almost 13. Among the people murdered in my family was my father, my stepfather, who was a wonderful man, several uncles, grandparents, many cousins, and of course lots of friends and acquaintances. One of the very important things which I experienced was I witnessed two very important uprisings which offered a basis of comparison and helped me write the book later, which was this book, Accomplices, Churchill, Roosevelt, and the Holocaust, published in 2011 in New York by Peter Lang, and so grotesquely overpriced that you couldn't buy it unless you saved up your whole life, like maybe they're charging $200 for it, or $170 or something like that. But anyway, so the two uprisings which I witnessed was, one of them was the the uprising in the Jewish Warsaw Ghetto, which of course occurred on the 19th of April 1943 and was suppressed by the Nazis on May 16th, 1943. And by that time I was in hiding in a building on a street next to the ghetto, and I still remember the very thick black smoke which rose from the ghetto during that time. And the second uprising which I witnessed was the uprising of 1944, August-September, by the Polish resistance movement against the Nazis, in which incidentally some Jews escaped from the ghetto participated. Uprising under the leadership of General Tadeusz Komorowski was the leader of the uprising. And of course there was an enormous difference in the two uprisings in one very important fact. The uprising by the Jews was unaided and received totally in silence by the leadership of the Western powers. Not a word was said at the time, not a word was ever said in the aftermath by the leaders of the Western world. In the Polish uprising of August and September of 1944, using a colloquial term, you might say they pulled all stops. The planes were flying. I saw them. I saw American planes over Warsaw, four-engine planes, dropping supplies to the Polish insurgents on parachutes. Many of these parachutes, of course, fell into the hands of the Germans because the city was crisscrossed as between Polish resistance and German occupiers. But this was certainly a very important experience. Now, speaking, of controversies, I wanted to mention to you, because in a way it gives you a perspective on a lot of things. In Israel, there is an institution called Yad Vashem, which is dedicated to preserving the memory of the Holocaust. It's like the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And the head of that, the academic head of that whole enterprise is a Jewish gentleman by the name of Yehuda Bauer, Professor Yehuda Bauer. And Professor Yehuda Bauer, for reasons which are best known to Professor Yehuda Bauer, has maintained for years that it was impossible for Allied planes to come close to Polish Jews in order to render them assistance or in order to show them moral support, both of which were, in fact, very important factors. Now, I saw the planes. He denies that planes could fly, against overwhelming evidence. If you ask why, I don't know. I wonder why. But nevertheless, he does. And this is, among other things, one of the illustrations of the controversies of the Holocaust. Now, just to make sure that we perform our academic educational function, I will mention to you 3 books that confirm what I'm telling you, that planes actually could and did fly to Poland in the places where Jews lived, where Jews fought, and where Jews died, even though it has been denied by lots of people, including Professor Bauer. And what are these books? One of them is the memoirs of General Tadeusz Komorowski, the commander of Polish uprising, and also the commander of Poland's home army, or what was called Armia Krajowa. General Komorowski in his book confirms that there were, would you believe, 424 Allied flights, British flights, RAF flights to Poland, some from southeast England, from the area of Lowestoft, and some from southern Italy after 1943. 424 flights. There were 80 improvised airfields, would you believe, in occupied Poland, right under the noses of the Nazis, on which some of these planes landed and took off. And these were 4-engine planes. And what did they do? They picked up couriers, they landed couriers, they landed information, they brought money, they brought supplies, they brought technical equipment, and they of course also brought weapons and explosives. And then there are 2 other books I'll mention, which prove the same point, books which are incidentally not concerned with the Holocaust at all. They happen to deal with Polish armed forces in exile, the armed forces that were fighting on the side of Great Britain and the United States. And these books are Jonathan Walker, who published a book called Poland Alone, and Michael Alfred Peschke, that's spelled P-E-S-Z-K-E, Alfred Peschke, Armed Forces of Poland in the West. And these books contain maps, pictures of the crews which flew. These books even include names of some of the crews and who flew what. And incidentally, General Komorowski lists 62 RAF flights as lost. And this was between spring of 1941 and summer of 1944. 424 successful flights, 62 flights lost. Well, so that's just a little illustration of things. Now, I did want to say that basically, and again, here we run into some controversies. There were three phases in the mass murder of European Jews by the Nazis in the Holocaust. And the first version, on which Joe, by the way, got some great pictures, the ghettos were the ghettos in Poland. The ghettos in Poland were used to reduce Jewish population by a variety of methods, of which starvation and exposure to the elements were the principal means, although there was also, among other things, sporadic killing and various other forms of sadistic outrage perpetrated on the population. But I did want to mention to you that in this phase, 500,000 Polish Jews died out of a population of only 2 million Jews available to the Nazis in the western part of Poland, because, as you might recall, because of the Hitler-Stalin Pact, the Russians occupied the eastern part of Poland on September 17th, 1939, and that part contained probably about 1.5 million Jews. But in the other part, the Nazis used the ghetto system to reduce the population by 500,000. And to give you an idea what that means, if that kind of regime were applied to the United States today, let's say the United States was occupied by the Nazis, it would mean the death of 80 million people in the first 20 months of Nazi rule. That's what it would mean. In this case, it was 500,000 out of 2 million, or 1 out of every 4. Now, this first phase, would you believe, is itself controversial, because for reasons, again, which were best known to him, but which I find ridiculous, Professor Hilberg and certain other people, there are quite a few authors like that, came to the conclusion, for a reason which certainly surprises me, is that the Nazis didn't know what to do with the Jews during the period of the ghetto in Poland. The ghettos were places where they temporarily stored the Jews until they figured out what to do with them. And one of the things that they allegedly were thinking to do with them was to send them to the island of Madagascar. Send them to the island of Madagascar. But because in 1941 Hitler felt that he was losing the war against Russia, somehow, he decided that instead of sending them to Madagascar, he was going to murder them. So that led to the next two phases. And the second phase, of course, was June 1941, which was the month, June 22nd, 1941, when the Nazis began the Barbarossa campaign against Soviet Russia. And Hitler sent the Einsatzgruppen, or the special units, squads, with the order to kill Jews pell-mell throughout Soviet-controlled territory. And of course, one of the examples of what that entailed, and one which you probably have heard about, was the killing of 30,000 Jews at Babi Yar, in which they were forced into these big ditches and were simply mowed down and shot. In other cases, however, the Nazis incited pogroms by local population or local authorities in the Baltic states like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, in the Ukraine, in Belarusia, and so forth. So that was the second part of the extermination of the Jews. And the third, of course, was the one following the Wannsee Conference of January 1942, and that was the use of gas chambers and using gas and crematoria to mass murder the Jews. And part of that system was embodied in 6 major destruction camps, of which you probably have heard. You have heard, of course, of Auschwitz, which in Polish is Oświęcim, Treblinka, which was the place where most Jews from Warsaw were taken and killed. My uncle, my mother's older brother, was almost certainly killed in Treblinka. And then there were Chełmno, Majdanek, Sobibór, and Bełżec, all camps in Poland. All of these, of course, unlike the difference between these places and the ghetto, were that these were all secret places. They were places never mentioned in the Nazi press, never discussed, and the regime that was used there or employed there was never made public. On the other hand, of course, the management of the ghetto was an entirely different thing. And one of the very good slides that Joe got was one which showed a big placard posted on a wall in Warsaw in 1941, which said, "Any Jew trying to escape the ghetto will be shot on sight." Now, of course, any Jew could mean a person who was out of his mind. It could be a 6-year-old child or 10-year-old child or whatever. And of course, shot on sight is no due process of any kind. And you might recall that Germany was actually part of the 1907 International Convention at The Hague on the conduct of war, the purpose of which was to ameliorate conditions for civilians and make sure that they are treated as humanely as possible during wartime. Germany was a party to the Hague Convention of 1907. So was Great Britain, so was the United States. But the Western powers never protested, even at a time when the United States still maintained its embassy in Berlin, because remember, it was not until December 11th, 1941, that a state of war went into effect between the United States and Germany, because Hitler, in a fit of madness, declared war on the United States on December 11th, 4 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. So these are some of some some of the questions and issues that I've been concerned with and written about. But I thought it might be useful, there is a choice. I'll show you some of my collection of books and explain why they are interesting. But I wanted to make sure that I told you about, in a way, how I fit into this system. How did I survive? And that is a subject, the question of how I survive is a question which, in a more general sense, is covered in this book, which I published in 2003, called Holocaust Voices: Interviews with Holocaust Survivors. One of the very important things that you needed to survive was assimilation, or having social contacts between Jews and non-Jews in the Polish community, because that made it possible for someone like me and for my stepfather and my mother to be able to look for people who might be willing to hide us, help us. It was much more difficult for non-assimilated Jews because they were more isolated from the Polish community, had fewer such contacts, and also because of their dress and their cultural background, they did not easily mingle with or look inconspicuous among the general Polish population. But these are only some of the factors. A very important factor was, as in all kinds of crises, money. Because money naturally made people's expenses. Money was extremely important in the ghetto because of widespread starvation and people buying food on the black market. Food which was smuggled at great peril by various people, including in some cases relatively small children. People who had money could buy that food. If you didn't have money, obviously, you starved. This was absolutely terrible, but it was part of the picture. Then there was a question of housing. What kind of housing could you get in the ghetto? One of the things that the Nazis did, that Hitler did, was to squeeze an enormous number of people into a relatively tiny area inside the city of Warsaw, some of the most dilapidated streets and buildings, and made it impossible for people to maintain either sanitary conditions of existence or find refuge from cold. You can, as I do even to this day, I look at newspapers like, say, the New York Times, and many local papers, perhaps even Toledo Blade does it, I don't know if they do, but many papers publish temperatures from around the world. And you might find it interesting to look up Warsaw any time from October of each year to March of next year, a 6-month period during which the temperatures are either at freezing, below freezing, or close to freezing. And it was in these conditions, of course, that the Nazis placed the Jews and brought down the population in overwhelming numbers. One particular number I wanted to share with you is, you know, Europe today as a whole has a declining population. If you take all the countries of Europe today and average them, the difference between births and deaths is there are 10 births for 11 deaths. Population is declining. But in the Warsaw Ghetto, the ratio was 45 deaths to 1 birth. 45 to 1. That figure alone gives you the idea of the absolute murder which the Nazis were committing. And of course, for that reason, I am very unhappy with Professor Hilberg's treatment. He's gone, by the way, but the treatment that he gave in his book was very influential of treatment of European Jewry, this treatment of the Holocaust. And there are quite a few of the academic bad guys in that category. One of them, incidentally, is Christopher Browning, an interesting figure who wrote one very good book about the Holocaust called Battalion 101, Ordinary Men was the subtitle. It was a very good book, and it was about German policemen, the kind who directed traffic, who volunteered to be part of Hitler's Einsatzgruppen and go into Russia and murder Jews. They had no problem doing it. And then most of them returned. Most of them had no problem. Some did, but most didn't. And many of them simply returned to previous duties after the war. But Browning also wrote a book in 2002 called The Origins of the Final Solution, published by Nebraska University Press, I believe, in 2002. And in this book, he just absolutely absolves the ghetto managers. He presents them as well-meaning administrators who, lacking instructions from Berlin, did the best they could. Well, I think of them as mass murderers and not people who did the best they could. That was complete nonsense. And may I say, by the way, that I believe that Hitler treated Madagascar as a complete joke, and the fact that a few people, including Adolf Eichmann, were doing what I call term papers about Madagascar with the help of the German Foreign Office was only a sort of merriment to Hitler. He considered that something of a joke. He knew that Madagascar appealed to European anti-Semites who thought, the idea of sending Jews to Madagascar was a sort of popular idea. But it was an idea which was completely at odds with Hitler's great masterwork, Mein Kampf. And in Mein Kampf, Hitler very clearly said that the Jews must be essentially murdered, liquidated. The Jews were defined as culture destroyers. They were defined as, in effect, a kind of cultural cancer, and sending them to Madagascar would be like putting cancer in a petri dish. And Hitler was not going to do that. And one of the things which all of these people miss is that the decision that Hitler made for further eradication of the Jews with the special killing units of 1941 was made at a time when he fully confidently expected victory at any time. And under those conditions, he could have sent the Jews or done with the Jews whatever he wanted. But he opted for murder. And the evidence for some of this, by the way, you will find in a book which was and it still is justly very popular, and some of you may own this book, William Shirer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Anybody here own a copy of William Shirer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich? Yes, okay. In that book, you will find all sorts of great references, among them a military conference which Hitler held just before launching Barbarossa, in which he said to the assembled German generals, including Goering, by the way, he said to them, all we have to do is kick in the door and the whole thing will fall apart like a house of cards. And you will also find an announcement made on October 2nd by the Nazi press chief Dr. Otto Dietrich saying, the war against Russia is actually won already. What is left is just a few minor details, but we have won. So there's no question that Hitler's decisions for murder were decisions made on the threshold of victory from his perspective, not from the threshold of defeat. And I'm very much reminded of what the great British historian Alan Bullock said about Hitler. He said, Hitler was a man who always kept his word, except when he gave it. Always kept his word except when he gave it. And of course, he was right in the sense that Hitler followed Mein Kampf. What he said he would do in Mein Kampf, he did, and he tried to do. So these were some of the things that I wanted to mention to you. I did want to give you a little idea of my survival. I owed it, first of all, if you want to name persons, my mother was a totally heroic woman, and I certainly owed it to her in any number of times. And there was also the question of money, and the question of money is very interesting because my mother divorced my father in sometime in 1939, the year of the war. And it so happened that my father, whose memory I cherish, was a relatively poor man. And the relations among everybody were quite non-belligerent, I might say, and I actually saw my father in 1940 with his new wife before he went to the city of Krakow, where he disappeared under circumstances that are unknown to me. But anyway, his job was that of an accountant. He certainly didn't have a lot of money. My mother used to tell me that she divorced him because he was too much of a gambler. I don't know whether that story is actually quite, shall we say, on the money, but that's the story that I was told. In any case, so she married a physician who was on the verge of retirement, who had considerable savings in American dollars. And I actually saw the money. I actually even carried it at one time. A huge thing of money. In the Warsaw Ghetto, that was salvation in terms of housing and in terms of food. These were very important things. But what I did want to mention to you as being undoubtedly more important than anything else was luck. Simply luck, for which neither money nor any other asset could substitute. And there were several occasions in my journey in the Holocaust where luck was the decisive element, and I wanted to mention them to you very briefly. One was when my mother, first of all, she at one point bribed her way into a German factory, and we had a picture. We had a picture of a factory like that, which manufactured clothes for the German Wehrmacht, for the German army. And so she got, because these people were supposed to be exempt from being sent to the gas chambers. This was in 1942. So we went to this place, and my mother her job was folding socks. And she had a huge box, which was probably as big as this or even wider. And she had me sitting in that box, hiding in there, so that if you walked into the factory floor and you looked around, you wouldn't see me. You would just see her working in the box. But one day, Nazi troops came into the factory, SS troops, helmeted with dogs, submachine guns, yelled "Juden raus," shot in the air, and an SS officer conducted a selection. And my mother, instead of doing the rational thing, which would have been to say to me, "Look, kid, go hide someplace or do whatever you can think of doing, but if I want to live, I'm not going to go and tell them that I've been violating their rules and keeping you in this box here," and so on. But that's not what she did. She actually grabbed me and held me to her side, and we appeared before this SS officer. And the SS officer was holding a leather whip, and he would make the choice between all the people who went before him. He pointed one way, and you would join a line of people that you could see they considered to be useless or undesirable or improper and so on, and they were going to the glue factory. And then others were let go. And my mother and I came before this officer, and she was holding on to me like this, and I looked at the man's face very intently for the whole brief period that she showed him her passport, her paper. And his face was completely impassive, and with a wave of his whip, he let us go. A totally amazing decision, contrary to the Nazis' own system. But that's what he did. But when I think about it, there were many occasions during that time where sheer luck decided the issue. And of course, sheer luck was involved even when you were crossing the street. You know, the Nazis incentivized turning Jews in by offering any Pole who would inform Nazi authorities about Jews, he would get food, I believe vodka, or a ration of alcohol, and money if you would do that. So there was an incentive. Well, you could be crossing the street and somebody recognized you, or somebody suspected that you were Jewish and said to the Nazis, "Go get these people," and so forth and so on. So there were all of those occasions. There was one occasion where my mother and I and the Christian Polish friends escaped from a train which was headed, according to a Polish railroad worker, they were taking us to Auschwitz. And we jumped off the railroad car, and when the German sentries were not looking, we turned and we ran to the nearest house that we could see, and we pounded on the door. And the door opened, and there were some very friendly Polish people who gave us bread and water and told us which way to go, to a village where our friends were from. And of course the question is, who might have been in that house? Maybe the SS, maybe any number of possibilities that would have been hostile. But that did not happen. And also one other one, which I want to remind my wife about it, shortly before liberation in January of 1945, where we were staying in this village, the remnants of the German army, would you believe, were essentially our guests at the house. I mean, they were taking it over. And I remember sitting at some tables where I was as far away from a German soldier as I am from Joe here. Of course, they were very dispirited German troops. They knew they had lost. They probably thought of their individual fates at that point, whatever it was. But in any case, death was right there in the corner. And of course, if they had known that there are some Jews here, we might have been shot, but we weren't. And I did want to conclude by telling you that my mother carried 2 cyanide pills in her handbag, one for herself and one for me, during this whole period. And in Poland, if there was a knock on the door 24 hours a day during the period of hiding, if they were coming to get you, they might not only come and get you, they might shoot you right there and then and just leave the bodies lying to be picked up by whoever wanted to. So luck was very important, and roughly speaking, the odds I beat were 1 out of roughly 30. Only 1 out of about 30 Polish Jews made it through Hitler's Holocaust. Okay, friends, I'll stop right here because I think I've taken a long time. And
Thank you, Alex. That's so much, that's wonderful, powerful, amazing stories of survival. We do, I think there's probably a lot of questions. I know I have my own. Krista has cards here. If you'd like to have a question, please write it down. There's a pen in the rack in front of you. You can fill it out. I suppose I can maybe get it started while that's happening. Alex, I have so many questions here. I'm just gonna, and you answered actually some of them. Can you explain a little bit about your family in terms of their education level, and how did you continue your education while you were in the camp? Could you do that at all?
No, I could not do that at all. There was nothing was really practically available to me or safe enough. And my education really consisted of learning to read from a Polish language paper published by the Nazis, in which I especially like to read stories having to do with the war, seeing which way the front is moving and how the Nazis would euphemistically explain that they were getting beat, so to speak, in various ways. And that was a way of learning to read, and of course talking with my mother. And it was a time spent at a time when the principle was, don't go near the window, don't jump, don't speak loudly, someone might notice, someone might be suspicious, don't do any of these things. So, I wish I didn't bring Barbara Millman's book, but Barbara Millman is an artist and an attorney who did my Holocaust story in a book in which she has deals with several Holocaust stories, and she tells these things. I did want to show people here one other very interesting book that I'd just like you to know about it. This is a book published in New York in 2002. The first edition came out in 1988, edited by a man named Michał Grinberg. It's like Greenberg, but with Y, G-R-Y-N-B-R-G, Grinberg. And the title is Words to Outlive Us. And the reason I'm showing you this book is because my uncle's essay is in it. My mother's older brother, Chaim Hasenfuss, wrote an essay. He was a graduate of Warsaw University, had a number of degrees from Warsaw University. He wrote this essay. They say they don't know what happened to the author. I assume he died in Treblinka, but the story is here at page 31. My mother, of course, often talked about him, and I can still remember him. He was a very scholarly man who knew a great number of languages. My mother said that he knew 16 languages. I don't know how close that was to whatever he did know, but he undoubtedly did know quite a few. And the essay which he wrote is actually, Chaim Hasenfuss, is available to anyone who wants to get it at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., where they have the original written copy, and they'll make a copy for you if you want to, and you can read it.
Okay, I have a question here, Alex.
Yes.
Because smell is such a powerful primal experience in our limbic system, are there any smells you recall from Warsaw? And thank you for your courage.
Oh, thank you very much. Very, very nice. So do I recall what...
Any particular smells from Warsaw?
Well, certainly, maybe the smell of fire, the residue of fire. It was just one of those things. Something I did not mention to you is that Mary Berg, in her diary, describes a German soldier who was a guard at one of the gates of the Warsaw Ghetto, and whose nickname was Frankenstein. And Frankenstein is surprisingly totally missing from Hilberg's account, and Christopher Browning doesn't come within 1,000 miles of Frankenstein. But see, Frankenstein loved to kill Jews and also maim them and torture them. And he did it for fun. It was a lot of fun. And he did it for a very long time. And the leader of the Jewish community, Adam Cherniaków, actually mentioned him to the German authorities on his knees, sort of dramatically speaking, but of course the Nazis didn't do a thing about it. They loved Frankenstein, and Frankenstein was part of the system. And if you wanted really good accounts of what happened, then think of Elie Wiesel's book. Elie Wiesel's book Night, which is a wonderful account, but also Steven Spielberg's fantastic film Schindler's List, which is, whatever problems Spielberg may have had or has now, his film Schindler's List is it's the real McCoy, so to speak, in my opinion. There are people who can get at certain things. Sometimes it's through art. Are there any of you here who are, like I am, Edward Hopper fans? Edward Hopper was a great American artist who I think had an enormous insight into what modern civilization is all about. And incidentally, let me ask you this question. Have any of you seen the movie Network? You have? Good. I've had it up to here and I'm not going to take it anymore. Remember that? Well, that was a great line and a great understanding of the modern world.
Oh, and the timing here is great. In terms of Elie Wiesel, in 2004, Elie Wiesel stood before the German Bund and told them it was time, on behalf of the German people, they should ask forgiveness for the Holocaust. Was he right or wrong?
Oh, well, collective guilt is a slippery slope, and I think it is actually misleading. And when you think, I hate to say Elie Wiesel was wrong, but I think that Schindler is a perfect example. Would I feel entitled to talk to Schindler and say to him, you are a German and you did this? The man was a hero, absolute hero.
Question here. Given the propensity in our day and age for people to believe in zany and kooky theories, such as the world being flat, if you were, heaven forbid, to stumble onto a Holocaust denier, what would you think, feel, and say to a Holocaust denier?
I would certainly think and feel that he was an idiot. That would be the first thing. Whether I would say it would depend. If he was very large and had a club in his hands, I probably would not say anything. Yeah.
Okay, and it says, and thank you kindly for your time. Did you go to Treblinka yourself, or was the jump off the train the closest you got to the camps?
Jumping off the train was the closest that I got to the camp. I did visit Treblinka, but I visited it after the war, at a time when we had our Jerusalem conference, and saw the place. Yes.
What was your liberation like from the Soviets? Do you remember that and what that was all about?
I do. I was as impressed I was by the Nazis. When the Soviets came, I couldn't believe that this was the army that defeated the Nazis, because the Russians looked absolutely ragged, and they did not present this fantastic spick and span, totally organized, totally overwhelming view, what it was. So in a way, that was surprising. But they did not systematically kill Jews, and and of course it was a very significant liberation.
Did you know that the end was near for the Nazis? Were there telltale signs that they were about to lose
Absolutely.
in terms of their behavior toward the Jews and the population?
Absolutely. You know, when the Russian offensive began, the one that liberated us, the ground was shaking all around me from their artillery preparation. There were lots of planes up in the air. The Germans that I saw right near us were completely demoralized, and it was clear that the end was coming.
Okay. What was your mother's name? Have you ever met anyone later in your life you knew while in the ghetto? Several questions, but I'll just start with those two. What was your mother's name? And have you ever met anyone later in your life that you knew while in the ghetto?
Oh, yes. Well, my mother's maiden name was Hasenfuss, which means rabbit's foot in German. Hasenfuss. That was her maiden name. And so that was that. And as far as people in the ghetto, certainly one person that I very vividly recall was Mary Berg's father, whom I met in New York. He was an art dealer, and he was a man with a great sense of humor, very engaging sort of person, and he was certainly one that I met, and he spent quite some, shall we call it quality time in the ghetto? Yes.
What did your diet consist of in the ghetto? And did you have consistent methods to keep your hope alive?
Well, the hope was certainly, and you know, this is where I suppose political science comes in. The hope was in the fronts, how the fronts are doing. What is the international situation like? Is America in the war? Is Britain holding out? Will the Russians hold out? You know, I want you to know that my stepfather, who was a man of great learning, and he got me interested in some of these things, bet another person a jar of herring that the Nazis would capture Moscow in 1941. He was very glad to pay off the bet. He lost, and the man bet that they would not capture Moscow, and they did not, of course. But so that was an enormously important concern for me. And I remember for a very long time, under the tutelage of my stepfather, I followed very closely the war against the Axis in North Africa. So whatever village Rommel would win, I would hear about it, and he would plot it on a map, and we talked about it, and all this sort of thing, and so on.
Did you come from an educated family, highly educated family, or educated?
Well, my uncle, whom I mentioned here, was a brilliant scholar, high-achieving brilliant scholar. My grandfather was illiterate in Polish, illiterate. I don't know whether he could read Yiddish. I'm just not sure about it. He was a wonderful man, had a great sense of humor, was a man of great personal integrity, and I admire him. But he could not read a word of Polish. And my grandmother did. She was sort of the brains of the operation, kind of. And he, by the way, accompanied her. You know, she was not taken to Treblinka because the Nazis wanted to save themselves trouble, so they executed by shooting those Jews who had physical problems of any kind. And somehow my grandfather's last words were that he had spent a lifetime with this woman and he was not going to abandon her now. And he went with her, and he was shot someplace in the area of the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw, which again Marilyn and I visited in 2015.
How old were you when you came? How did you come to the United States, by plane or boat? And how old were you? And what was it like first coming and seeing New York City?
Well, I came at age 15 on the same ship, by the way, on which Mary Berg came, the Gripsholm, which was a Swedish ship. Age 15. And I went to the High School of Commerce, and I did want to mention to you that High School of Commerce had two very interesting alumni. One of them was George Gershwin, and for that reason I'm all for Rhapsody in Blue. And also Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig graduated from High School of Commerce, and he went to Columbia also, but he went there as an undergraduate. And of course, all of that sort of thing. Yeah. So well, it took a long time. It took 2 years. You know, I came in 1947. The war ended 45, 47. And I spent some time in transit in Sweden. What happened was that my mother bribed somebody to get us on a Swedish coal vessel which sailed from the port of Gdynia to a port in southern Sweden. And we spent some time in Sweden, aided by American Jewish charitable organizations, which kept us afloat there for a while. And then she made the executive decision to come to the United States because it was up to her. And I remember that there were 3 options she was considering. One was Israel, one was Australia, and one was the United States. And she chose the United States. We had family in the United States, and so we came here, and I thought that was very fortuitous.
And we're thankful for her decision.
Yes, very much so.
The last question I have here, did you ever encounter anti-Semitism as a child in the people you met? And do you have any ideas on how anti-Semitism emerges in individuals?
The answer is yes to that question. I encountered quite a bit of it. Would you believe even in the city of New York in the 1940s, looking for summertime jobs and other things, and was certainly something I realized. You know, that question, the question about what one could do about it, is one that beats me, because people have, you know, one of the reasons, you know, why I think that Mein Kampf is one of the most terrifying books ever written is that so many people believed stuff which makes absolutely no sense. In Mein Kampf, Hitler described Jews in a manner which could hardly be believed by anyone who has common sense. But that didn't keep millions of people And of course, to this day, there are some who believe that, this is Hitler, so forth and so on. So I would pass on that question. It is the enigma of human nature, human existence, and conceivably it carries with it some very ominous portents for what may yet happen in the world. That's what I would say.
Alex, on behalf of First Unitarian, thank you so much for coming and sharing.